Hello, welcome. I'm Patrick Gill, the Senior Director of Tax and Financial Policy with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. We're here to explore a small sample of microeconomic insights collected through the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions this year. Whether you're from the public, private, or third sector, we hope you come to use this information and survey product to inform your decision-making as we all move towards and collaborate on a more inclusive economic recovery and growth. Let me provide a little background first. To better understand what Canadian businesses and their employees were experiencing during COVID-19, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce embraced the opportunity to work with and support a new Statistics Canada product called the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions this year. To foster informed decision-making on retooling and pivoting in this economy, the Chamber recognized the importance of capturing timely and specific data throughout the crisis. What StatCan has accomplished this year is quite remarkable. Even beyond the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions, StatCan has created a comprehensive resource of data and insights during the pandemic for all to use. The information collected through the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions alone is very extensive. The Chamber teamed up with Deloitte Canada to analyze and visualize the data captured by StatsCan. The Chamber has been sharing these findings with the entire Canadian Business Resilience Network since becoming available in April 2020. Today, two Deloitte leaders will take us through a presentation of some of the insights the Canadian Chamber and Deloitte have discovered through StatsCan's data. Will Cornelissen is the Canadian Federal Financial Services Leader, and Bina Rajput is the Canadian Commercial Banking Leader at Deloitte. We'll be hearing from them in just a moment. But first, let me introduce you to Ziad Shaddad, the Director General that oversees the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions at StatCan. Ziad, what can you tell us about the important work StatCan has been doing during the pandemic, including the relevant background on the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions? Ziad, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Really appreciate this opportunity to talk about the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions. Grateful to be working with yourself over the past few months, and grateful for both the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and Deloitte for the opportunity to connect with you today. As a quick backgrounder, pandemic drastically changed the Canadian economy back in March 2020, and there was an urgent need to truly understand the impact of the widespread measures taken to contain the spread of COVID-19 on Canadian businesses. And as such, StatsCan was very happy to partner with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce to launch the survey, really provide insights that were needed and the impacts of COVID-19 on businesses, on employees, and the economy. In short, in April, what we really wanted to make sure we had an understanding of, particularly as the pandemic started to take hold, was the impact on revenues and employee retention, credit, and survival, some critical aspects of business. In short, the survey allowed StatsCan to collect information on the impacts of the pandemic, what it was having on businesses in Canada, the way businesses were reacting and adapting to the pandemic, and the needs of businesses to continue to allow them to sustain themselves through the pandemic and beyond. In short, our goal was really simple, to collect information related to emerging issues to inform the recovery and maintain a regular pulse on business intentions and sentiment. Ultimately, the data that we provided addressed the need to inform decision-making by governments, by chambers of commerce, to make sure they had the information required to devise strategies to help support business during this difficult time. The Canadian Survey on Business Conditions is truly remarkable in terms of its flexibility and adaptability. There's three aspects to it with regards to it being an innovative product, a timely and relevant product, and information that really kind of breaks things down by region and by industry. So if I can trouble you to go to slide 4, the rapid turnaround in terms of the survey and how quickly we collect data, having a short and focused questionnaire with simple questions, really helpful to kind of produce something so quickly. But the most important part of it was working closely with partners such as the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and the Business Resilience Network in order to kind of reach businesses and make sure they participate in the survey and buy in so we can have a better understanding of these needs. Ultimately, the survey continued to shift and address emerging needs. Feedback that we got from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and other partners to help devise relevant questions was extremely important, particularly as we updated those questions to maintain a pulse through a crisis that was continuing to throw different challenges at the business community. The product is timely, so ultimately data is published within 2 to 3 weeks after collection concludes. Statistics Canada makes sure that the product continues to be relevant, not only by updating the question, also making sure that we're providing a wide range of tools that kind of address emerging needs and issues. For example, having a pulse on small business, having a better understanding of the impact on business on certain communities, such as women or visible minorities. These are some of the products that came out of this that we published on our website to ensure relevance. And timeliness really comes down to how quickly we're able to turn this product around, collection to publishing on our website. Lastly, the relevancy aspect is really supplemented by having a better understanding of impacts by region and by industry. So data is made available at the national, provincial level, and territorial level by industry, by size, and by business characteristics, which includes age of the business, the type of business, and again, majority ownership, such as women or visible minorities, immigrants to Canada, etc. And we're also able to provide this data for the 20 largest cities in Canada. A quick snapshot on slide 5 gives you an indication of essentially how the survey comes to light. We try to have a sample of 30,000 businesses as a target, 5 questions, very simple to the point questions. Ultimately, we're able to stratify it, and April 2020, we've had quarterly iterations of the survey. On slide 6, you can see how some of this data comes together and is being published by StatCan, but ultimately the value is how our colleagues and partners outside the organization are using this data, such as Deloitte, such as the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, which we're very grateful that that data continues to be valuable and relevant to yourselves. Lastly, as we move forward, there's on slide 7, there's a couple of things that I just kind of bring to light in terms of the short-term aspect of the survey. We do have an intention to continue the survey and maintain it through March 2021 in order to continue measuring the impacts on Canadian businesses as the economy begins to recover. We also want to make sure that we're maintaining forward-looking core questions supplemented by new quarterly questions tailored to emerging needs. Not new, this is something we've continued to do, and we want to make sure we continue to evolve the survey based on the needs of the Chamber, based on the needs of our federal and provincial partners, to make sure that the questions we ask are relevant and reflect the needs of Canadians. And lastly, we want to make sure that we continue to engage our stakeholders as broadly as possible moving forward with this survey, make sure that's relevant. The survey does aim to do a couple of things. We want to explore options right now to see how we can maintain a regular pulse on business sentiment beyond the crisis. At this point, the focus is very much on providing business conditions and throughout this crisis and quality data. Forward, we're going to explore options to see whether or not there's an appetite for something over the longer term. And then that could also include maintaining a time series on 4 questions and make sure that we've got a vehicle to capture information, evolving trends, to address emerging issues at any given time, not just through this crisis. Again, our plans in the longer term are still exploratory in nature. In the short term, we do have plans to launch another version of the survey in the spring of 2021. Back to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Ziad, for your leadership, innovation, and the Team Canada approach StatsCan has shown this past year. Bina, Will, now over to you for your presentation.
Great, thank you, Patrick. By way of introduction, Will Cornelison. I'm a partner in Deloitte's financial services practice, and I'm joined by Bina as well. Bina?
Hi, folks. My name is Bina Rajput, and I lead our Canadian commercial banking business. So essentially, I work with all of our Canadian financial institutions in thinking about how to better support business clients.
So before we get going, I just want to say that Deloitte is very pleased to have had this opportunity to work with Statistics Canada and with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, especially. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce and Deloitte have had a long partnership, and I think it's really been predicated on the focus on helping Canadian businesses grow and succeed. And certainly within the COVID-19 crisis, that focus has been really acute on focusing on how to help Canadian businesses survive. And so the research that StatsCan put together was just incredibly deep and really helped inform how we engage with our clients, which include obviously the Canadian businesses themselves, but also many of the intermediaries or other organizations that are helping them as well, like the federal and provincial governments, also some of the urban governments, and then also other institutions, such as the financial institutions that Bina works with as well. So I'll pass it over to Bina to start to go through the different pieces of research we went through. Obviously, there were different waves of the research, and during each wave, there were slightly different. There was information that we could put together that derive different insights. So we'll present that information as we go along, with a view that obviously this is changing over time, as we just heard from Statistics Canada. So Bina, over to you.
So thank you, Will, for sharing that. We really want to start off in the very beginning of the pandemic. So this is the first wave of the research that we had. And really unsurprisingly, we saw an incredible amount of impact on businesses, and it was unprecedented to anything we had seen ever before. 70% of businesses saw that their revenues were negatively impacted, and a quarter of the businesses surveyed actually saw a revenue decrease of 50% or more. We understand that a significant amount of this is for a number of reasons, but the largest reason was clearly around a demand issue. There was a decrease of demand for products and services, but there was also a thing that we saw around cancellation of services. But finally, there was just a number of heightened fears around going to physical businesses and things like that that also impacted these businesses quite significantly. When we talk about those impacts, they were also very much seen, as I had mentioned, around minority-owned businesses. The survey data allowed us to dig deeper into this and saw a definite need for better support for these businesses, as in every single aspect, they were much, much more significantly impacted. However, we also saw a huge amount of creativity and resilience and resourcefulness from businesses in Canada. We saw that they had new ways to interact with customers. We saw they had new ways to interact internally within businesses as everyone moved towards work from home. And then we also saw an increased use of virtual connections with customers. This meant e-commerce, but it also meant things like live streams and other types of impact that consumers had never seen before. While all of this resourcefulness was happening, businesses were also laser focused on expense management. Them around how do you combat those lost revenues by getting rid of things like travel, advertising, marketing, subcontractors. And finally, they allowed all of these expenses to be cut in order to start spending on a few different things like sanitation and cleaning, work from home supplies, as well as regular repairs and maintenance. So we really did see businesses show their best selves at a time of quite literal crisis for their operations. I'll move over to wave two, back to Will.
Yeah, so wave two, when we looked at this research, which was conducted over the summer, we were really trying to look at what was the uptake around some of these government programs. So we saw a lot of, obviously in the spring and into the summer, there was an announcement almost every other day where another program was being announced to support Canadian businesses. And I think the data showed that the majority of businesses actually took advantage of many government programs, especially CEBA, the Canada Emergency Business Account, but also some of the other programs. And I would say that CEWS in particular, what helped many businesses hire back some of the employees that they had to let go at the beginning of the crisis. And so at that time in the summer, we thought that was working quite well, that take-up had been there. We saw a little bit less take-up in terms of some of the mortgage payment deferrals, and some of the rent programs, but there's still some uptake with businesses there. But we also saw, again, minority businesses being disproportionately impacted in the sense that they were rejected more often for rent and mortgage deferrals. And so that as with previous finding, continues to be a concern for Canadian businesses going forward. And then if we look at also beyond that, we also try to look at what businesses were doing to adapt. And so at that time, there'd been a lot of, with a lot of the lockdowns, there'd been a movement to moving the workforce to teleworking or working remotely. And we did see during that period some businesses start to go back to physical workplaces. So I think especially as some of the precautionary measures were put into place, businesses are able to bring more folks back into those physical locations. And of course, cases at that time were also lower, so there was a little bit more latitude to do so. But we also started seeing then that some of these changes in terms of how businesses are operating are actually permanent. And so the businesses that had moved a significant portion of their workforce to working remotely saw that as actually being a permanent change, and also a change that might actually increase going forward. Many businesses saw this as a way to cut operating expenses, to improve work-life balance for their employees, and also in general to just have more resilience for whatever the future might hold for future crises. So a lot of good things happening during this period, this wave, that a lot of good findings that were coming from businesses' responses here. And then in wave 3, back to Bina.
So wave 3 was an interesting set of insights. This would have been at the very height of the recovery towards the end of the summer. And it started to paint a bit of a different picture. So we knew we were in the height of the recovery. Many businesses were feeling much better, but we also started to see this disproportionate impact to certain sectors within the Canadian economy. Surprisingly, these are things like arts, entertainment, and recreation, mining, quarrying, and oil and gas extraction, information and cultural industries, as well as accommodation and food services. These 4 industries continue to have a significant impact. The biggest part of the impact is really around fluctuating and insufficient demand, but these businesses are also responding with the biggest amount of things like layoffs, and they're also double as likely to consider bankruptcy. And so as we look at recovery and as we look at the second lockdown that's in front of us, these are the businesses that are going to continue to feel the pain, as you know that they had not even fully recovered through the best of the pandemic. When we look at these businesses, though, they do feel like they have gotten significant support from government aid programs, that they have the liquidity that they need, and they don't actually see obtaining financing as an option. However, when we look at these businesses, they actually don't feel financially prepared for a second wave. And this refers right back to that sectoral comment I made on the previous slide. There are certain sectors that did not feel prepared for this lockdown that's in front of us right now in several parts of the Canadian economy. And they don't necessarily feel like more debt is what's going to help them get through this impact. A lot of these businesses that we've spoken to are saying they need much more support and really just need to get customers back in the door. I think at the end of this kind of wave 3 in our insights, we did still see a significant amount of resiliency and positive messaging around what adaptations businesses have taken to remain operational. Many of the businesses that had shut down through the first lockdown did recover and opened right back up again towards the end of the summer. And many of them, as Will had mentioned in the Wave 2 insights, have adopted new offerings that are going to be here to stay, be it teleworking, new options for parents that are going to be much more flexible, and then significant amounts of digital needs, as well as things like PPE and sanitary measures. At this next wave of insights that we look at for wave 4, what we're really going to be looking for is how do we understand what sector issues have happened through the lockdown, where have impacts been felt, and then what do we actually think that they need in order to be better supported. Will?
So that summarizes our most salient findings from the first 3 waves. As Bina mentioned, we're certainly looking forward to the next wave of research to see what we find from that great information that StatsCan is producing. But we're also open to any questions that people may have around this research and how we synthesize the findings around that.
Thank you, Will and Bina. The Chamber has really enjoyed working with you and greatly appreciates Deloitte's significant data leadership during the pandemic. And just for clarity for those watching now, you should know that these insights they are derived from StatsCan's data, but have not been verified themselves by the agency. And with that, would like to just turn quickly to a few questions, if we could. Bina and Will, how is data like this helpful and being used by some of the decision makers Deloitte works with?
So that's a great question. As I alluded to before, Deloitte works with a number of the government organizations that have been trying to figure out what the right policy response is to this crisis, and trying to optimize that reaction to the health crisis and the commercial side of it. And so this data is really, really useful. The amount of statistical significance that around these findings is just very, very useful in the terms of it's not just an anecdote, but it can actually provide systemic views around what's going on. The other piece that's really useful is to be able to, as Ziad mentioned, is to be able to dive down into specific jurisdictions. As we've seen through this crisis, it's very uneven. Like, so there are surges in one geography or an adversely impacted industry. And so that's very useful to be able to start to fine tune the policy response as opposed to having a blanket response. So that's been very useful with those clients. I know Bina's had some good reaction in the financial sector as well.
Yeah, I would say that the financial services across the institutions we work with every day, there has been a ton of interest around this type of data. It's giving folks a real-time impact and assessment of where businesses need help. I think I have continued to say this throughout much of the pandemic, but when it comes to things like loans and better support, there was a time and place, and I think that both the government and financial institutions responded well. And now it's really coming to those nuanced measures, like Will had mentioned, around how do we actually go about supporting business owners now. And so when I think about what financial institutions are doing, it is much more targeted towards the impacted sectors, as well as thinking about things like, how can I work one-on-one with a business owner who is trying to be more digital? And so I definitely think that this is the data that they need to be able to make faster decisions and be able to have a pulse on the market.
Very interesting. And what are some of the broader implications of some of the insights that you've noticed in the data set, such as businesses' aversion to debt or the moving trend towards remote work? Yeah, what are some of the broader implications that you've mentioned in your presentation today?
I think specific. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, I would just say for sure the movement to digitization, I think we're seeing that in all businesses of all sizes, where they're actually realizing that this is actually being a catalyst to help them make more aggressive changes, to bring down their costs, and also to actually expand what kind of business that they can do well. I do think that there's going to be a risk aversion element as well. I mean, one of the things I think we're concerned about, and this is also borne out by our interactions with our clients, is that there are individual entrepreneurs that may have elected to close down their businesses during this crisis, and now may not have the appetite necessarily to open a business or have the financial wherewithal to open a new business, having taken the shock. So I think that's something for us to be aware of going forward.
I think the only thing I would add, I think, is Patrick, you made a comment on one of the themes that we're seeing around an aversion to debt. I almost want to think of it, it's not so much of an aversion, but so much of a what does a business really need to continue to move forward and feel comfortable with. Talk to the financial institutions, they talk a lot about this duty of care that they have to their clients. And so there might be more money that is available to be loaned to them, but it doesn't actually help them with the core of their business, which is continuing to serve customers. Well, I don't necessarily look at it as aversion so much as what do I need to actually have a business that I am comfortable moving forward with that isn't going to be mired in debt or bankruptcy concerns for the next 5 years. And so I do think that there is a specific sentiment towards loans and debt that is actually quite measured, which I think is a good thing about our economy right now.
Thank you, Bina. Thank you, Will. Ziad, similar question to you. How are some of the decision makers and partners you're working with using the data that you've been capturing through this specific product or maybe others during the pandemic?
So that's a great question. So I guess as a national statistical agency, we work very closely with our partners to have a really good understanding of what their data needs are and make sure that we are providing information that really supports informed decision making. I think this survey is a perfect example of that. And we developed several questions alongside the Canadian Chamber of Commerce as well as partners at the federal and provincial level to really understand what the needs were at a given point in time. So originally we were looking at what were the impacts of the shutdowns. Forward, it was the nature of the questions were around PPEs, for example, or some of the innovative measures that businesses were taking, and so we emerged in that way. So within that context, there's a broad range of users. How they're using it is really kind of similar to what was described now. From a different perspective, whether it's from making informed decisions from a business perspective or informing decisions from a policy-making perspective. More broadly than that, Statistics Canada has launched a COVID-19 portal, which provides data beyond the business aspect of it through the Business Conditions Survey, touches on a wide variety of other social subjects, impacts on mental health on Canadians with regards to the availability of PPEs, and other aspects of the pandemic. So it's more broad than a specific set of users, but our goal is to make sure that the data we collect is relevant to a broad range of users and ensure that the questions we ask are updated on a regular basis, that we work towards continuously improving our products. That's one way that we can help resolve that. As a specific example with this survey, I'd raised it earlier with regards to collecting data with regards to visible minorities and businesses. That was something that was emerging throughout the crisis, and it was really important for us to adapt our survey to start collecting that data so we can provide better insights. So I think those would be some examples that further to your question.
Thank you very much. In fact, you actually answered another question of mine. But if I could, one further question, more of a reflective question. Looking back at what StatCan has accomplished this year, what are you most proud of?
I have to say, as an organization, I'm extremely proud of how agile we've been with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic. That's probably what I'd be most proud of. We've really been at the heart of it by providing quality data to help inform decision making throughout the pandemic. We quickly mobilized our resources, prioritized them in order to launch the COVID-19 portal I referred to earlier, providing really a kind of robust set of tools to help inform decisions on a broad range of socioeconomic factors, from health to the economy to other concerns that Canadians have. In addition to the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions, for example, EP comes to mind. That's one indicator that we've started to kind of produce regularly. New products to help support and inform the food supply chain with regards to temporary foreign workers in Canada. Again, I mentioned earlier PPE and mental health was another concern of Canadians. So quite frankly, I'm really proud of how agile we've been as an organization, how we've been able to adapt and kind of produce data relevant to the needs of users during this critical time. And quite frankly, I feel really fortunate that I'm working for such a dynamic organization at this point in time and able to contribute to that effect. So yeah, that's what I'd say I'd be most proud of.
Well, thank you again so much for the work that you and your colleagues have been doing. Bina, Will, I have one final question for you, and I think you touched a little bit on this at the end of your presentation. But now thinking towards recovery, what sort of information should we be capturing, specifically StatsCan, to support decision makers thinking? And are there specific data points that are missing that we should be focusing on, maybe for specific groups?
Yeah, I think that sectoral view is going to be really important. So I think when I look at recovery, where I look at impact right now, I think there's a bit of a dichotomy between small businesses and larger businesses that we're seeing play out in the media in quite a large way. So I think there's a size element, and I think there's a sector element that I'm continuing to look forward to finding a little bit more out about, because I do think there's going to be some disparities also around geography, depending on where industries have been hit harder. But I continue to think that this is going to be a decision-making support tool. And so the more we can have around insights on better to support those businesses that have been disproportionately impacted, be it geographically, size-wise, or sector-wise, I think the better it's going to be for us going forward.
Yeah, I would also add, I think, especially as we start to get to vaccinations, thinking about the observation that Bina shared around businesses not wanting to take on more debt, I think we really need to look at the revenue side of the equation and think about what do we need to do as an economy to stimulate revenue. How can we increase consumption, increase investment, give businesses and individuals that confidence to interact in a way that's being constrained to date. So I think maybe there will be some interesting data points there as to what that's going to take in order to generate the revenue.
Great. Well, that concludes today's presentation. And again, on behalf of the Canadian Chamber, I would like to thank our Deloitte and StatCan guests for joining us today. The Canadians and businesses, Canadians and businesses have benefited greatly from your work. By continuing to work together, we can remain resilient and emerge stronger and faster from the pandemic. For access to the information shared on today and for other insights, please visit chamber.ca or cbrn.ca, and of course, StatsCan as well. Thank you very much. Take care.